Good evening, spiritual warriors. Welcome to Spiritual Warriorship, where we read, discuss books by His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Swami. And at the present time, we're in Spiritual Warrior 4, Chapter 2, Choosing Love Over Fear. And we're really near the end of this chapter, and I've somehow been blessed to know where we're going next, but that'll be a surprise. We're also moving into our second year of the Spiritual Warriorship video cast program. And as I've said before, I hope it has been helpful to those of you who have been regular viewers, and even for those who may come once in a while. I feel that Bhaktitirtha Swami has given us so much to help us in our spiritual life, because it's a spiritual life that we need to strengthen in order to function in this battlefield that's going on, madness out there now. So let us begin, because I would like to finish this chapter and go through one question and answer, which I feel may help many of us who don't ask questions. So I greet you all, and those who are following the Vaishnav Kartik calendar, I wish you a happy, blessed Kartik, and may you get closer to the Lord, knowing who He is, your relationship with Him, and as He's how to conquer Him, and He's conquered by the love of His devotees. And we see how we run after Him with love, as Mother Yashoda. He lets us catch up with Him. So I hope we're running and offering some service at this time. I wish you all much success. All right. We left off going into the section called The Evil Dog and the Good Dog. And I hope I keep coming back to the three main fears we talked about, or the miseries that we all go through. We even had some questions for you to think about and work on, which I hope you did. So let's move on, and we'll see if you have any questions after this. He says that he wants to conclude this section with a Native American parable. Certain Native Americans, tribes, understand that there is an evil dog and a good dog within each person, and they continually fight. Now the dog, it said, the dog we feed the most will usually win. I think this parable you can relate to, because the same phenomenon goes on in our own lives, because we all have a lower nature and a higher nature. We all have the choice to fear and to remain in a combative mindset by viewing others as adversities. Adversaries. Huh? Tongue got caught up on that. Adversaries. All right. Thank you. Adversaries. We have the choice to remain in a negative mindset by struggling to fulfill our desires, because we fear that if we do not make our own arrangements, no one else will help us, not even God. Now, conversely, we have the choice to engage in proper action instead of just worrying or justifying our lack of action. We have the choice to look deeper into the problems on this planet instead of just trying to change them through social activism, which only alters the externals. You know, I had an interesting conversation today with a dear friend of mine. She lives here in the neighborhood. She takes me to some of my appointments. Right now she's transporting me back and forth twice a week to my physical therapy appointment. But she's a senior lady who's talking. But she's been in politics from way back. She was a part of the civil rights movement and still carrying some of that activism, social activism. And as you know, it's election time across the country, and there's early election and all. So she and I were going. I still feel since we are a part of this society, we need to try and cast votes for what may appear the best, what is it, of two evils, or sometimes even someone who's trying to put forth an effort. But anyway, she and I, we went over all the amendments and things that was on the ballot. We had a sample ballot, and finally decided yes, no, and what the party and all like that. So today she came to pick me up, and she looked so tired, and I'm saying to her, I said to her the other day, okay, we're finished with that part. Let's let all this political stuff rest, because what is going to happen is going to happen. But I said to her today, I had a realization with all the bickering and stuff that's going on, and I don't want to go into it, I'm sure most of you are. And the problem is there's no spiritual energy in any of it, and I'm sure you all agree with that. Now, I had given her a copy of Bhaktitirtha Swami's leadership book a few years ago when she was getting me involved in some politics. She would have these meetings at her home and bring in the politicians and all. In fact, I even gave that young man who was running a copy of the book. But I said to her, you know, maybe, because she was saying how tired she was, maybe you have a new, I quoted to her, what, for everything there's a season, or there's a reason for everything. It may be time now for you to slow down rather than being out there marching and stomping and whatever you do or did. And talk with people, and even some of the political people, and try to help them get to a higher state of consciousness, because nothing will change until consciousness changes. So I reminded her that she had the leadership book for an age of higher consciousness, and maybe she could study that, read that, and help others. So I'm just reminded of that, and nothing's going to change out there as long as we're dealing on the material level and seeing others as adversaries. So he tells us that we want to engage in a total revolution, which is ultimately an internal revolution that then manifests in the environment in a healthy way. So we got to do internal work. We've got to go inside and move the obstacles and all the things we've talked about, and that are talked about in this book, The Enemies of the Mind. Anxiety, anger, all of these things. Now, when we realize that we can simply fall into the loving embrace of the Lord, we can avoid fear on all levels. By acting in the proper way, we will receive the best results because the Supreme Lord is not unfair. If we act properly in spite of the circumstances, we will receive reciprocation because as we surrender to the Lord, He will reward and support us accordingly. If you've read Bhagavad Gita, if you're reading Bhagavad Gita, if you have a Bhagavad Gita, look at chapter 4, text 11. And what does the Lord say there? As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my plan in all respects. So it's telling us He will reward us as we surrender. Now, he says, the author says, we readily avoid the sinful activity and embrace the proper action, knowing that the indwelling presence of the Lord in the hearts will accommodate the proper action. As we have more faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our level of fear will naturally decrease. As we have more faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our level of fear will naturally decrease. And how do you have more faith? You hear about Him, you read about Him, you read His Word, you develop a relationship with Him, and you begin to see how He manifests in your life. And that increases your faith. You have to know where you are. Know the difference between the spiritual and the material. So we're going to close now with the culture of fear. The world is at war. I'm sure that's no news to you. It is a very serious time due to the massive thrust towards this culture of fear that causes people to put their guards down and act according to their lower nature. This culture of fear causes them to feed the evil dog. And what did we say? It's the dog that we feed that wins. Now, when you feed the evil dog, then that puts anxiety into the environment and makes it easier to control people. Fear can lead to all kinds of irrational behavior because people will simply want to save themselves or want to force something to happen in their own way. And isn't that usually it when you see that antagonism and all, or you feel someone's in fear, it's that they want something to happen the way they want it. And that's just trying to be controller, which we aren't and aren't able to do. They lose a sense of community, which involves serving and caring for each other. And they end up fixing their minds only on their own particular concerns or ideas. That's real selfishness. We've talked a lot about what happens when you're selfish.
Can you read that sentence again?
Excuse me?
Can you read that sentence again?
Read that sentence again. Okay. Let's start with fear can lead to all kinds of irrational behavior because people will simply want to save themselves or want to force something to happen in their own way. They lose a sense of community, which involves serving and caring for each other. That's community, caring for each other. And they end up fixing their minds only on their own particular concerns and ideas. Now, for many people, even their relationships do not work because they do not act as genuine partners. They are not ready to accept and trust the other person. When people develop spiritual relationships within institutions or with the spiritual master, they often lack authenticity because of a lack of love. It often revolves around manipulation and exploitation. The relationship will develop out of fear if people use others to try to build up their own sense of protection. The relationship will develop out of fear if people use others to try to build up their own sense of protection. This goes on in commerce, education, and also in spirituality. Most people are selfish due to fear that is smothering the world. Most people are selfish due to fear that is smothering the world. Now, if our own lives, let's look at in our own lives, try to avoid falling into these patterns. Otherwise, the amazing current of fear that is sweeping the planet and causing people to absorb themselves more in eating, sleeping, mating, and fearing will sweep you away. I hope, I almost feel like wanting to read that over again because this is very, very important to pay attention to try to hear it, imbibe it, and bring about a change in our lives, and we can then help with a change in our whole environment. Let's look at this culture of fear. We know, as he starts out, the world is at war. It's a very serious time. Why? Due to the massive thrust toward this culture of fear that causes people to put their guards down and act according to their lower nature. Now we just looked at the evil dog and the good dog, which is symbolic of the higher and lower nature within us. This culture of fear causes them to feed the evil dog, which then puts anxiety into the environment and makes it easier to control people. And you know that goes on from insurance salesmen to whatever's going on now. When I don't watch TV, I do get the computer news. I don't buy newspapers, but what I get on the computer is enough to see how these so-called politicians are just putting fear in people. And you see what happens when people get filled with fear, that anxiety, that anger, that behavior that's just not proper, causes more confusion. So what he's saying, if you're hearing, is not something new. It's things that we have been involved in, immersed in, and maybe a part of, or trying to even understand. And he's telling us what makes the difference. He said that fear can lead to all kinds of irrational behavior. Why? Because people will simply want to save themselves or want to force something to happen in their own way. They lose a sense of community. And what is community? It involves helping and serving and caring for each other. Not just I, me. It's for others. But when you're fearful, it's all about I, me, or how I can manipulate that person to do it my way, because I don't trust their way. It's not the proper behavior. So they lose a sense of community, which involves serving and caring for others, and they end up fixing their minds only on their own particular concerns or ideas. For many people, even their relationships do not work. We're seeing that everywhere, aren't we? Even in our own spiritual organization. And it doesn't work because they do not act as genuine partners. They are not ready to accept and trust the other person. When people develop spiritual relationships within institutions or with the spiritual master, they often lack authenticity because of a lack of love. It often revolves around manipulation and exploitation. The relationship will develop out of fear if people use others to try to build up their own sense of protection. This goes on in commerce, education, and also in spirituality. Most people are selfish due to fear that is smothering the world. Now, he's telling us that in our own lives, try to avoid falling into these patterns. Otherwise, the amazing current of fear that is sweeping the planet and causing people to absorb themselves in eating, sleeping, and fearing will sweep you away. That means you have to be mindful You have to be on guard. You have to be involved in spiritual study, spiritual association, and being on guard. It is generally becoming a more dominant aspect of Kali Yuga. For this reason, people take to harsher lifestyle. Their loving propensity has been shut down and transformed into fear. Now that's the end of this chapter, choosing love over fear. And if you noted, he gave us in one section the choices we have. We're not being forced. We may feel like it, but we do have choices. Before I close this chapter, we still have time. Let me ask this. Are there any question and answers? Anybody in the chat room tonight? Ain't nobody in the chat room? I thought that would happen at one point. Okay, everybody's getting ready for the holidays. Okay, I'm sure someone's online somewhere out there. And even if you're not, my job, my service to my guru is to share his books. I thought I heard music in the background. Okay, so let me go on. I want to go through a question and answer for this chapter, because as you know, each chapter at the end there are question and answers. And sometimes it's a question you may have been thinking about. It's a question that would come up, or his answer may answer something that you have on your mind. So let's do this. This was the question presented to him after this particular lecture. How should we unlock the subconscious blocks that continue to affect us? Certain patterns continue to repeat in my life, the person is saying, although I'm not even conscious of why they happen. Although I am trying to focus spiritually and think positive, I realize that a certain blockage is inhibiting my progress. I think most of us can ask that question. We're trying if we're in the spiritual life. This is Bhaktivedanta Swami's answer. If you see me continuously placing my hand in a fire and burning myself, you would probably wonder why I keep repeating the same action. Nevertheless, if I continue to follow the same patterns, I will continue to get the same results. These repeated activities often indicate that we have the same level of consciousness, and consequently we will continue to receive a similar response. Consciousness. Now, how do we deal with these patterns? If our current environment reinforces these patterns, we may need to change our associations, because sometimes our associates affect us in negative ways. In our endeavor to spiritually rejuvenate ourselves, we should try to bond with like-minded people so that they can reinforce our goals and we can learn from them. Now this takes being courageous and fearless. This is why I love those 12 qualities of spiritual warrior. One of them is fearlessness. Of course, the first one is mastery of the mind. We went over this in the very beginning, almost 2 years ago. So if you can go back in the archives and find, if you're curious, and see what are those 12 qualities. Because it means really having a sense of yourself and having these qualities so that you can say, if you reach this point with associates, I really have something else to do now, or I'm studying something now, I won't have time to spend here. And no, it's okay. So you try to bond with like-minded people so that they can reinforce our goals and we can learn from them. And the statement just came to mind, like attracts like. So if you are practicing spiritual practices and endeavoring, you will attract that to you. So again, it's that mindfulness of seeing who are you attracting and what's coming into your life. He said we can compare these patterns to a drug addiction. For instance, an addict knows that certain association, environments, and mindsets will rekindle their addiction. If after recovering they go through a period of sadness or loneliness, they may search for that artificial stimulation in order to fill the emptiness. There are 3 psychological perceptions that can also help an individual deal with any of his or her problems. Okay? These perceptions include personal assertion, putting oneself in the other person's shoes, and disassociation. Now, love, he says, is not just a matter of conceptualization. It involves our words, actions, and thoughts. When a problem arises in a relationship, you may need to apply personal assertion by personally involving yourself and trying to help. At other times, it's necessary to put yourself in the other person's shoes. You should not only think about the problem, but also try to visualize yourself in the other person's position. I remember in it's a leadership book. He has 10 steps there, and one of them is, the suggestion is to write a letter as if you were that other person, telling you about what they're feeling, so that you get a sense of what the other person may be going through or feeling at that time. Consider the way in which they would respond to your own words and actions. What is that? Think before you speak and even before you act. And then if there's a reaction, you'd stop to think, if you were that person and that person spoke to you and took that action with you, how you would feel. For example, if you have an argument with your spouse or child, you have choices. You can continue to see your own position as right, which may be necessary at times, but you can also take the time to consider how the other person may have perceived your own actions. Simply by considering the other person's views, you may gain an entirely different perspective on the situation. And that's really a very mature position to have. And it also takes being spiritually inclined to see that perspective and to work from that perspective. Now, we referred, he says, to the last perception as disassociation. There are times when you just need to disassociate yourself by watching your actions and the actions of the other person from a distance. Make sense? And this means one of the qualities is humility. It may take some humility rather than bickering back and forth and back, trying to prove you're right, to just step back. I have a phrase I say to some people who are coming to me and talking, and it's going back and forth and nothing's going on, to just pray for that person and offer a prayer. Dear Lord, I release and call the person's name to your loving care. You know what is right and just for them. And you know what is right and just for me. And then just disassociate, as Bhakti Tirtha Swami. And try to disassociate with a calmness of mind that the Lord is taking care of them or touching their hearts. And then you do some internal work on yourself. What the action was, what the words were, and look at possibly your reason for doing that or saying that. Then you also being taken care of by the Lord. He says that this will help us look closer at ourselves and others with less prejudice and attachment. And it will open our minds to additional possibilities. So if you disassociate, you step back, you check yourself out, you put yourself in the other person's shoes, you may get a reasonable, practical solution at that. There's other possibilities in handling the situation. In this way, you can bring much more to a situation by acting in a loving way. In some cases, we can act lovingly by first trying to understand the other person's thoughts and actions. Such a reflection may shock us because it may reveal our own level of selfishness and fear. Often, we only think about what we want. So he's giving us things to think about next time something comes up. Stop. Look. Listen. But from an internal loving space. Now he says these three perceptions may help us in our endeavor to alter our consciousness and to always accept that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has made arrangements for our ultimate benefit. What do we say? There's a reason for everything. There are no accidents, no coincidences. In the event, if the event in our lives do not benefit us in any way, then God is extremely cruel. It would mean that God lets people undergo all types of negative situations without any concern for them. Why serve such a God who allows such a negative circumstances to happen in spite of our endeavors to serve Him? However, we understand that God is always in control. In fact, He tells us in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, text 8, I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So God controls the material as well as the spiritual. What does that mean? It means that everything directly or indirectly happens through the sanction of the Lord. Those, what does it say in the Bible? That not a blade of grass can turn without the Lord. And another place, and even in the ancient scriptures, you know, He takes care of the bird, the tiniest ant, and the biggest elephant. They're protected and cared for by Him. What about us? We need to imbibe this and get to understand that God controls the material and the spiritual. So everything directly or indirectly happens through His sanction. Now, if we can just accept that our circumstances are meant to benefit us, we will be able to connect with the loving aspect of the Lord and then learn to grow from a seemingly negative situation. If each of you there watching this, hearing this, stop for a moment and just look at a situation in your life right now. Can you accept that that circumstance is meant to benefit you? We just said that God controls the material as well as the spiritual, and that means that everything directly or indirectly happens through His sanction. Now, if we can just accept that, our circumstances are meant to benefit us, then you open yourself to grow. We'll be able to connect with the loving aspect of the Lord. Because it's because of His love, He brings the situation that will help us to grow, that will benefit us, because He is in control of the spiritual and material. Then, when we see it that way, we can grow, learn, or act properly. The bottom line is that people have so much fear because they have such a small amount of faith in God. That's another quality of a spiritual warrior: firm faith. Krishna, God, is in everything, and He's there to protect you. He says he says the bottom line is that people have so much fear because they have such a small amount of faith in God. They really do not believe that God loves them and that God wants to facilitate them. They do not realize their own essence, which is in connection with the Supreme Lord. Therefore, they do not act according to their real identity. You know where this came up? What comes to mind is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, when Arjuna didn't want to go on the battlefield. He was fearful. He would kill his grandfather and all his relatives, and then the world will suffer, and you know. But Krishna spoke to him as a teacher and told him he has to know the difference between the material and the spiritual, and that he's there to help him. And then that's where Krishna goes into telling Arjuna who he really is as an eternal living being, as a spirit soul. And the same eternal spirit soul is in all his relatives. So he really can't kill them because the soul is eternal. It's the body that may go down, but that soul is eternal. And it can't be shot. It can't be cut. It can't be drowned. And that's our essential essence. And that's the knowledge we need to have as these different circumstances and situations come up, and we'll be less fearful because we will know that God, Krishna, is sanctioning it for us to learn something from. And it may be to see how fearful we are, and then to turn to Him, chant His holy name, cry out to Him. Now, although the mature devotee understands that the material world is full of miseries and dangers at every step, padam yad padam na tesam, danger at every step. And this is the mature devotee. He's dearer, very grave. That's dearer, very grave and doubtless and fearless. The devotee knows that God is all love and everything is everything is resting on Him. And there's that verse in Bhagavad Gita where He tells us that. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text 7. And He says to Arjuna, O conqueror of wealth, there's no truth superior to me. This is the Supreme Lord speaking. Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread. So with that, I'm going to end this chapter. And as I said, we'll start a new chapter next week. We'll be beginning our second year. I don't remember the exact date. I think it was about November 13th or 14th. But we're going to go to Spiritual Warrior 2. We did a lot of reading from there on love. That's transforming lust into love. And the chapter I've chosen is chapter 7, Loving Our Neighbor. So if you have this book, Spiritual Warrior 2, open it, if you will, and start reading ahead. Or look back at the School of Love, which is at the beginning, because choosing love over fear, you may need reminders of what love really is. I hope this was helpful. And as I said, if you at any time want feedback or just give me feedback, really, you can write to me email at motherandjohnny 108 at gmail.com. Now, did anyone come into the chat room? Okay, you sure it's working? Because you're in. Okay, so the chat room's working and everyone is doing what they need to be doing, and it's all right. I'm just trying to follow what my guru had said, that whatever happens, directly or indirectly, it's under the sanction of the Lord. And I have offered you some points and concepts tonight from Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and I wish you all a wonderful, blessed week of Kartik, of prayer, meditation, and practice of what you've heard, or examine yourself of your different fears. Where are they coming from? Remember, we looked at the miseries, either from our mind, from the demigods, or the environment, or from our family, friends, co-workers, the whole socialization. See what's going on, and then take steps towards giving more love, and then you'll definitely receive. So I'm very happy for your being here, and look forward to being with you next week. And I wish you all a Hare Krishna and a happy week, and Hari Bol.